1. This story takes place in Seattle, Washington. The sun found a way to spill light through every break in leaves and branches of the surrounding trees. It was a warm summer's day. One of those days that just felt right, calm like waves of the vast ocean of potential for adventure. My boyfriend and I decided we would take the day to explore. Usually that meant heading onto the Route 120 bus and heading north or south depending on the day. We decided we would head out. The bus often smelt like piss and alcohol, but it got us to where we needed to go, and it was cheap. Businessmen who didn't want to pay for parking and transients with their homes in bags flooded the seats. The overwhelming aromas from each different lifestyle danced through the air, only to make their way in the depths of your sinuses. Anyone who's taken public transportation regularly can tell you that as cheap as it is, the crowd can be inconvenient. We went and had ourselves a wonderful day. Burgers and beer in our bellies. We decided it was time to head home. Back onto the bus we went. And here's where things got bad. A tall, dirty man in a turquoise turtleneck set foot onto the bus. His legs seemed to have entered 5 minutes before the rest of him. He was giant, especially in comparison to my 5'2" self. You could tell any number that appeared on the scale was solely there due to his bones, since there was not a single ounce of fat or muscle to be seen on him. His eyes were sunken in and the color of set, stained old blood on a sheet. The skin on his hand hugged the bone tightly, as if it were a long-lost friend, while the other one held something in his pocket. I was focused on hanging out with my significant other until I could feel eyes on me. His gaze embraced my uncomfortable feeling and cloaked my security with irritation. I turned around and he was staring. It's fairly normal for people to just have no social etiquette on the bus, for some reason, so it wasn't too shocking. Manners aren't enforced, only admired, so what can you do? I told my boyfriend that the guy was staring at us, and we just ignored it. Our stop to our house was coming up, and this man showed a particular interest in what we were doing, so I was a bit freaked out. My boyfriend is protective, but I'm very careful when it comes to confrontation with strangers, in case they have a weapon or are fucking insane. Plus, if I had been wrong that the guy was staring at me, I didn't want to send an angry boyfriend after him. We stood up to get off the bus. He stood up. Maybe it was just a coincidence. We got off the bus. He got off the bus right behind us. We crossed the street. He crossed the street following us. We stopped. He stopped. I turned around and made eye contact. We stared at each other, hand still holding something in his pocket. Then he started to walk away. Good, he's leaving. It was just an awkward misunderstanding. I told my boyfriend that if the man started walking down the hill, he obviously had bad intentions with us, considering there was no reason to walk the direction we were, unless you lived in one of the houses around the area. This man did not live near us. We had never seen him until that day. My boyfriend and I start walking down a hill that's towards my house. When I see the man that was following us stand at the top and start to walk down. Where we lived, we had to cross a tiny bridge in the woods, then climb up a hill and walk down the street to get home. Our location would give an ample opportunity to do whatever this man had in mind. Construction was being done in the area to build new houses, which will become an important detail in a moment. I tell my boyfriend he's following us. Run! When we started running, the man started running. After we crossed the bridge, we had the option to either take our chances running up the hill and hope he didn't have a gun or weapon, or we could take a sharp right and cut through the construction on property. I had been yelled at for cutting through before. Fuck construction. I'm running. We cut into the construction area behind the houses being built, then ran up to my house from that area. It's hard to describe, but there was an all-too-perfect shortcut behind the buildings straight to my home. We couldn't see where the man was from my home since the construction, which had just saved my life, was blocking my view from the hill where the man had followed us. Never saw that guy again. and I hope I never do. 2. I'm a 36-year-old woman. When I was 26, I went through a life-altering, hope-crushing, has anyone seen my will to live kind of breakup. To save you from reading paragraphs of heartbreak, I will sum it up by saying that it would be more than 3 years before I got into another serious relationship, and that I probably would not have survived if my precious toddler girl hadn't needed her mama. About 2 months after the aforementioned breakup, some female friends invited me to the very large, old and beautiful house that the two of them had rented for a July 4th bonfire and cookout. When I arrived at the house, they told me they had invited a guy friend who they wanted me to meet. I had seen his picture on one of their MySpace friends lists and commented that he was cute at some point before, but they promised me that there was no pressure. I was, after all, mostly still a raw and tragic mess at this point. In any case, the guy friend arrived and we were introduced. While he was not as cute as his profile picture, he was funny and easy to talk to. Besides, I wasn't looking for anything, so whatever. I then learned that he was quite taken with how gorgeous I was, even though he chose to tell me he had been, in his words, nervous because I could tell looking at your profile picture that you have huge upper arms and I thought you might be a beast. He was quite the charmer, obviously. We hung out that night, and when he asked for my number, I gave it to him because he seemed decent enough as a person. Fast forward 2 weeks or so. We've talked a little through text and instant messenger, and have hung out with our group of mutual friends a handful of times. I make it very clear that I'm in no state for a relationship, and that I can't go there if that's what he's after. He says he understands, but that he enjoys my company. Fair enough. One night after we've been out with our group at our usual bar and restaurant, I agree to go back to his place with him. We hang out, have sex like consenting adults, and go to sleep. No big deal. The next morning, we're just hanging out and chatting a bit before I have to head home. At some point he says, "You know, you're a really heavy sleeper." My initial reaction is to chuckle and agree that yes, I sleep like the dead, before I catch some sort of odd in his tone that I can't put my finger on. I say, "Wait, what do you mean?" He stumbles over his words a little and says, "Oh, I just honestly thought that you were pretending to be asleep because you were making all these little noises, like you were enjoying yourself." I felt someone had poured ice water down my spine and was speechless for a moment before I said, "What did you do to me?" He blanched at my tone and quickly said, "Nothing, really. I mean, once I realized you were really asleep, I stopped." He refused to elaborate on that statement, but I felt absolutely sickened. In the months following this, he would text me obsessively, send me messages on MySpace at all hours of the night, telling me things like, "Have fun getting laid, cunt." Apparently this all stemmed from his inability to understand why I didn't want to be his girlfriend or see him anymore. He started flirting with my friends in an attempt to make me jealous, and even started trying to chat up the 15-year-old sister of my best friend. Except that his flirtation devolved into saying he hated her because she reminded him of me. In the end, his batshit behavior only stopped when one of my friends, who he said was disgusting because she was so overweight, but that she had pretty eyes, responded positively to his advances. They're still married as far as I know. I contacted him about 5 years ago wanting to apologize for any pain I might have caused him. He ended up making inappropriate comments on my Facebook pictures in the middle of the night, and picking weird petty fights with my fiancée in the comments. Even though he is married to a psychiatrist, his actions made it abundantly clear that growth and rational behavior still aren't his strong suits. I now live 700 miles away from where I first met him. I moved back to my hometown 2 years ago. Unfortunately, I learned about a year ago that he now lives in the same state. Thinking about him still makes my skin crawl. I live in fear of him realizing that I'm a relatively short drive away, and I hope on all that is sacred that we never meet again. 3. I'll start this story with a trigger warning. My friend and I contributed to this dangerous situation by putting ourselves in places we probably should have stayed away from. So keep in mind, we didn't always do the things we should have, didn't always listen to common sense, and we could have been a little more intelligent in certain instances. That's life sometimes, and retrospect is always 2020. This happened several years ago, right around the time when the wild party era of our early 20s was winding down into the chill get-togethers of our late 20s. I was at a party hanging out with some good friends and my sisters. We were having some fun drinking, playing guitar and talking. Important people to this story are Peter and Kyle. Kyle was an old friend, and Peter was a newer friend of about 3 years that I'd been hanging out with a lot. Peter and I decided to grab a few beers and walk to a close-by elementary school and climb around on the monkey bars and talk. It was around 9 to 10 p.m. at this point. I know it might seem like a kind of silly notion, but sometimes it's fun to play on the equipment and feel a little like a kid again. The alcohol helps. Or maybe it's just a place to get away, where you don't expect to see anyone. Either way, we wanted a place to walk to, and the school seemed like a good idea. We grabbed a few beers and started walking. We hopped the fence and started approaching the side of the building that would take us to the back side of the building and subsequently the park. The front of the building had some lights on, but the side was mostly dark. There was a metal railing and a slightly platformed sidewalk that followed the side of the building. A lot of schools, in my experience at least, seem to have something like this. About halfway into the side of the building there was an indent, of which the platformed sidewalk and railing followed. So if you can imagine that the first half of the building had a little light from the front, but when the path curved to the left to match the indent of the building, it left only darkness. As we approached the left turn in the walkway, we talked about nothing in particular. At this point, I didn't get that cliché feeling of unease. We just kept going. The second we turned the corner, we see 2 figures in the shadows just looking at us. We recoiled in shock, probably saying something along the lines of, "Oh shit," or "What the hell?" They seemed a little surprised as well. But they knew we were coming. They had the advantage of hearing us from likely at least a few hundred feet away. They must have been silent at the first moment they heard us, because we had no indication that there was anyone around the corner. After the initial shock, and both parties realizing that the other wasn't, at least for the present moment, posing any danger to each other, we relaxed a bit and said hi. We learned that they had a similar idea as we did, and were drinking at the school. Instead of choosing the park, however, they chose this little corner, likely thinking it would keep them hidden. It clearly worked. Also, unlike us, the school was an all-night event, hence the handle of vodka on the ground near them. I'll take a moment to describe these 2 people. The male was approximately 5'10", skinny, and couldn't have been much older than 18. He wore a torn metal shirt, which is actually fairly important to the story. The girl was about 5'4"-ish, a little plump, and had that goth punk look. Now at this point, the initial shock of the unexpected duo had worn off, but I was still a little uneasy. I kind of wanted to turn around and walk back to the house. But my friend was talking to the guy, and we were chatting in what seemed like an amiable way. So I decided to just chill for a bit and see where this goes. After all, this could be one of those funny stories where you have a good time with complete strangers in an entirely unexpected scenario, and maybe meet a new friend. Spoiler alert, this is the polar opposite of that kind of story. I can't tell you the total duration of the time we spent there, but I'm going to estimate it was about 45 minutes, give or take. As the minutes filled the hourglass, the vodka in the bottle dwindled away. I was gingerly sipping my beer, not sure what to expect from the night and wanting to stay alert. As the vodka receded in the bottle, red flags started to pop up, left and right. The last one below brought the tension to a maximum, far exceeding the initial shock of running into this strange duo. The girl was telling me that she was related to the Jeffrey Dahmer, the cannibal serial killer. She said this in a proud kind of way, like she was bragging about a famous relative. It's entirely possible she was lying and telling me this to scare me or seem edgy, but either way, it was a weird thing to brag about. The guy's reason for downing the vodka was because of his Russian descent. He thought because he was Russian, he not only had to drink vodka, but had to drink copious amounts of it quickly. At some point, he had some kind of techno music playing on his phone, and he got uncomfortably close to my friend Peter and danced in front of him. There was no invitation, no, "Hey, check out my sweet dance moves," just dancing in his face while Peter stood there uncomfortably and watched. And I should point out, this wasn't really what I, or likely anyone for that matter, would consider dancing. It looked more like the initial reaction of someone being set on fire, but on loop. Lots of rapid fist movements in random directions, and rapid leg movements. Peter and I uncomfortably looked at each other, mutually exchanging the "what the fuck" expression. I think we both knew that at about this time, we should probably leave. The final instance brought the tension up to a potentially dangerous level, and it was about my shirt. I was wearing a button-up shirt, nothing fancy, more like the kind of shirt you'd wear to your friend's birthday dinner at a mid-tier nice restaurant, and less like the dress shirt you'd wear to the same friend's wedding. What can I say, similar to the crazy Russian, this made-up friend is picky about shirts. But either way, this shirt was way too nice for this crazy Russian, and in his eyes must have made me a desperate douche. He started telling me I'd never get girls with a shirt like that, and I just brushed him off. Okay, I've done reasonably well in that department, but thanks for the advice. He even said to me, I kid you not, "I should take you to the mall with me and I'll show you how to get girls." I mean, do I really need to comment on that statement? Says it all right there. Then it started escalating to the point where this kid was in my face and going to try and fight me. And by this time he was pretty trashed and very well could have thrown a punch at any moment. I had my fists clenched by my side and very seriously considered throwing the first punch, giving my friend and I enough time to get the hell out of there. But somehow I de-escalated the situation and he stood down. But at this point, the tension was still high and the feeling was very ominous. Thank God, right around this point my friend Kyle and my sisters showed up looking for us. We walked back to the house with the strange duo not far behind us. I talked to Kyle ahead and briefly explained the weirdness of the last 45 minutes, while Peter stayed behind and talked to the strange duo. It's important to state that regardless of all the weirdness of the night, the crazy Russian only had a real problem with me. My friend's shirt must have been just the right level of not nice, that it didn't even ping the crazy Russian's radar and trigger his anger against moderately nice shirts. So Peter walked behind, talking with the strange duo, further trying to diffuse whatever tension was left, and just being a genuinely nice guy. Me, however, walking ahead and whispering to Kyle must have fueled some kind of paranoia that we were talking smack on the strange duo, which we totally were. I wish I could end right here with the old crazy Russian and cannibal girl let's not meet, but unfortunately, the night gets much worse. Eventually, the strange duo walked back the way they came, and we hung out in the front yard for a few moments, talking about what had happened. I recounted all the weirdness, which at the time included much more detail, for about 15 minutes. We went inside, hung out for a while, and let the recent events kind of drift away. The plan was to get this train back on the rails and to have a good night. At some point, Peter asks me to go outside and have a smoke with him. I know. I need to stop hanging out with Peter alone outside at night. In the front yard. The layout of the front yard is very important to this next part. When you walk out the front door, the garage and driveway is almost immediately to your left. The garage protrudes about 5 feet or so from the front door. There was a truck in the driveway, and the plan was to chill by the tailgate and have a cigarette. I walked along the right side of the car on the driver's side, while my friend walked in between the garage and the hood of the car to go around the left side. As he's nearing the left side of the hood, I hear him yell, "Oh, hi," in a shocked but not altogether unfriendly way. I look over and see him standing there, the crazy Russian standing in front of him. This all happened in the matter of a second, but it seemed like a minute. They both stood there for a moment. You could see the crazy Russian studying Peter's face for a split second before his fist went up and he hit Peter right in the temple. Peter hit the car, then the garage, and went down. Thank God the garage was there to dampen the fall a little bit. The strange duo took off down the street. I wish my first reaction was to check on my friend, but I ran after the crazy Russian. After all, the punch was clearly meant for me, not Peter, who had been nothing but nice the whole time. So I couldn't let the crazy Russian get away with it. And the way he was sloppily running, he was clearly drunk, and I wouldn't have too much trouble catching him. Right around this time, my sisters and Kyle came outside, hearing the ruckus. They checked on Peter while I chased the strange duo. I caught up to the crazy Russian and punched him several times, getting him in the back of the head and the cheek. Eventually, he was able to get away and ran off. I didn't chase at that point. I felt I had got equal vengeance, and then some. My friend was delirious, not quite sure what year it was, and there was blood dripping everywhere. He did know who the president was, which he humorously pronounced as Obama. We brought him into the shower and cleaned him up, got him dried off, and eventually determined that we had to bring him to the hospital. He turned out to be fine, and we eventually left the hospital at around 6 in the morning, went to my apartment, and finally got some rest. It was apparent that they had followed us back without us seeing them, and had hidden behind the car, listening to us talk about them. That must have really pissed them off. The really creepy thing is that they must have stayed there for another 30 to 60 minutes just waiting. The thing that scares me the most, other than the fact that my friend could have been seriously injured, is that one of my sisters could have walked out there. In this strange duo's state, they seemed to have no problem attacking indiscriminately. So, Crazy Russian and Cannibal Girl, let's not meet. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 3 True Scary Stories, episode 267. Thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. Well, I haven't recorded late at night for a while. It's currently 2 in the morning. I'm trying to get the audio for the day's video done. I've got a trip for more photo therapy 3 times a week. Got that later today, so I'm trying to get a jump on this video, so I'll have less work to do when I get home. Okay, so I'm going to run off and get a late dinner, a very late dinner actually, and possibly have a bath. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.